The iron gate's clang ripped through the antechamber, a brutal period at the end of the life he'd known. Elias felt the reverberation deep in his marrow, a dull throb mirroring the emptiness in his gut. The guard, gaunt and sharp-eyed, a man etched with too much observation and too little empathy, crooked a finger. "Yard this way, big man. No loitering." Elias, still encased in the rough, ill-fitting denim uniform, obeyed the terse command. The air assaulted him first. A foul blend of sterile cleaner, unwashed bodies, and a metallic tang, like ancient blood. Then the sonic assault. A cacophony of shouts, barks of laughter, and the rhythmic thud of a basketball. The yard itself was a vast concrete slab, scoured by the merciless glare of a reluctant afternoon sun. A formidable fence, impossibly tall and crowned with glinting razor wire, caged the oppressive sky. He became acutely aware of the scrutiny, 1,000 pinpricks of predatory eyes tracking his every move. The familiar flush of heat crept up his neck, the old shame twisting in his stomach. He was a large man, always had been. Years of comfort, the quiet sanctuary of a desk job after the white-knuckle chaos of his past, had softened his frame considerably. Here, it was a glaring target. Near a makeshift weight bench, a cluster of men, muscles straining beneath thin t-shirts, openly guffawed. Their leader, a lean figure with a serpentine tattoo coiling up his neck, jabbed a derisive finger. "Look at that, boys. They're sending us the next Thanksgiving feast." His voice was a rasping sneer. His companions howled with amusement. Elias tried to bleach them from his awareness, fixing his gaze on the guards retreating back. But the barbs escalated. "Hey, pork belly, you gonna rip out of those clothes?" Another voice, closer now. "Heard they got a special diet for you, lard ass. All the extra gravy you can eat." His jaw clenched. He knew this ritual. He'd witnessed it play out in countless arenas, with varying stakes, but the underlying dynamic remained constant. Pinpoint the weakest link, then exploit it. He just hadn't expected to be the prey. Not anymore. He found refuge in a corner, leaning against the grimy wall, attempting to project an indifference he didn't possess. The man with the serpentine tattoo, whose name he'd overheard as Rattler, sauntered over, his retinue fanning out behind him. Rattler halted a few feet away, hands braced on his hips, a smirk playing on his lips. "What's your name, Tubby?" Rattler's voice was a low growl, laced with menace. Elias met his gaze, his own eyes, typically serene, hardening to flint. "Elias." "Elias, huh? You look like an Elias. A soft Elias. You know what we do with soft boys in here, Elias?" Rattler's eyes raked Elias's midsection. "We make 'em softer." A ripple of laughter spread through Rattler's crew. One of them, a hulking man with a shaven head, stepped forward. "Maybe he needs a little workout, Rattler. A little push-up competition." Rattler's eyes gleamed. "An excellent idea, Butcher. Let's see what our new friend can do." He turned back to Elias. 10 push-ups, Elias, on the count, and if you falter, well, let's just say there are consequences for not playing along." He gestured to the concrete, still radiating the sun's stored heat. Elias hesitated. He could refuse, but that would only invite more aggression, more pain. He could comply, but even then, they'd likely find fault, turn it into a spectacle. He decided to engage for now. He dropped to the ground, the coarse concrete abrading his palms. 1, Rattler counted, a sneer glued to his face. Elias, with a grunt, pushed up. 2! He felt the weight of their gaze, the anticipation of his failure. His muscles, long accustomed to a different kind of exertion, began to hum. 3! The mockery persisted, but a subtle shift began to ripple through the air. Elias's movements, though heavy, were fluid, controlled. He wasn't struggling, he was performing. 8, 9, 10. Rattler's voice held a flicker of surprise. All right, fat man. Maybe you've got a little something in there. But a push-up doesn't make a man. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. This yard is a jungle, Elias. And you're just a big, slow gazelle. Elias slowly regained his feet, his breathing calm and steady. He locked eyes with Rattler. I've been in jungles before, Rattler, and I've seen my share of predators. His voice was even, devoid of overt threat, yet the underlying steel was unmistakable. Rattler's smirk faltered. He stared at Elias, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. The easy confidence he'd projected moments earlier seemed to deflate. He took a backward step, then another, signaling his crew to follow. They retreated, murmuring amongst themselves, their laughter subdued. Elias watched them go. The sudden quiet that had descended on that corner of the yard was profound. He heard a different kind of murmur now, a hushed exchange among the other inmates who had witnessed the interaction. He hadn't said much, hadn't made a grand stand, but he had held his ground. He hadn't broken. The sun dipped lower, painting long, distorted shadows across the yard. The bell for evening lockup shrieked, a jarring, urgent clang that echoed the earlier gate. Elias joined the shuffling line of men, his mind replaying the day's encounters. He knew this was just the prologue. The iron gate had slammed shut, but a different kind of door had just creaked open. And behind it, he suspected, lay a far more intricate and perilous battlefield than any he had ever known. He had survived the first skirmish, but the war, he knew, had only just begun. Whispers and wicked grins. The mess hall rang with the percussive clash of meal trays, a metallic counterpoint to the low drone of male voices. Elias, hunched over his plate of nondescript slop, felt the prickle of unseen gazes. Rattler's brief discomfort in the yard had evaporated. Now the insidious murmurings began. He didn't need to decipher their exact words. The snickers, the pointed looks, the abrupt silences as he passed. They spoke volumes. He was the fresh spectacle, the lumbering anomaly, and the pack was closing in. He idly nudged a stringy piece of meat across his tray with a plastic spoon. Across the cavernous room, Rattler presided over a table overflowing with his lieutenants. Shank, a wiry, tattooed man whose eyes darted with a manic intensity, and Brick, a silent, hulking brute whose very stillness radiated menace. Rattler, his perpetual smirk a fixed mask, caught Elias's eye and raised his plastic cup in a mocking salute. A ripple of laughter snaked through his enclave. Elias dismissed it, immersing himself instead in the hall's monotonous rhythm. He'd weathered far worse than adolescent taunts. Still, a cold knot coiled in his gut. This was no battlefield with a clear enemy. This was a slow, grinding war of attrition, waged in confined spaces with psychological armaments. Later that evening, in the recreation area, Elias found himself cornered near the dilapidated pool table. The air hung heavy with the scent of stale sweat and cheap disinfectant. Shank, his face a canvas of faded ink, blocked his escape. "Heard you're quite the strong man, big fella," Shank sneered, his voice a raspy rasp. "Good for carrying things, maybe. We got some gear that needs moving." Elias met Shank's stare, his own expression a blank slate. "Not interested." Shank's smile thinned to a predatory slit. "Oh, you will be. We're all interested in staying comfortable here, ain't we? And comfort comes at a price." He vaguely gestured towards the buzzing yard, where other inmates were engaged in card games, hoisting makeshift weights or simply pacing. You got something to offer? Or are you just gonna be dead weight? Before Elias could reply, Brick materialized beside Shank, his shadow engulfing Elias like a physical presence. Brick remained silent, but his sheer bulk and the deliberate crack of his knuckles conveyed an unmistakable message. Rattler, observing from a distance, arched an eyebrow, a predatory glint in his eye. Elias recognized this as a probe, a preliminary strike. He could attempt to shrug them off, but that would merely postpone the inevitable. He could fight, but a brawl now, encircled by Rattler's crew, would end disastrously. He needed to buy time to decipher the intricate dynamics of this place, to find his footing. "What kind of gear?" Elias asked, his voice low and steady. Shank grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. "Just a few boxes, down in the storage room. Nothing heavy for a man like you." The sarcasm was thick, yet Elias detected a flicker of genuine curiosity in Shank's eyes, a hint that Rattler hadn't divulged the full extent of the push-up display. "Fine," Elias conceded, his face an unreadable mask. "Show me." The storage room was a dimly lit, musty cavern, crammed with broken furniture, cleaning supplies, and forgotten boxes. Shank led him to a stack of heavy-looking crates in the back, shrouded beneath a grimy tarp. "These here," he said, nudging one with his foot. "Need 'em moved to the far end, and careful. Some of 'em got delicate contents." Elias knelt, examining the crate. It was crudely constructed from wood, far heavier than any gear ought to be. The weight itself wasn't the issue. It was the clandestine nature of the request, the implication of illicit goods. This wasn't merely about relocating boxes. It was about asserting dominance, about forcibly drawing him into their orbit. He rose, gripping the crate's rough edges. With a grunt, he lifted it, feeling the strain across his back and shoulders. But his face remained impassive. He moved the first crate, then the second, then the third, stacking them neatly as instructed. Shank watched him, a peculiar blend of suspicion and grudging respect in his gaze. When the last crate was in place, Elias wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. "Done." Shank nodded slowly. "All right, big man. Maybe you ain't completely useless." He paused, then added, "But don't think this means you're in. You're just useful." The unspoken threat lingered in the air, for now. As Elias left the storage room, the image of Rattler's wicked grin flashed in his mind. He had navigated this minor skirmish, but the war was far from over. He demonstrated his utility, but he hadn't revealed his full strength. Not yet. He knew that to truly survive, he would have to become more than just a strong back. He would have to become a force to be reckoned with, one that even Rattler couldn't disregard. The whispers would persist, but soon, Elias knew, they would be whispers of a different kind. The Yard Challenge. The clang of the morning bell ripped through Elias's sparse cell, a grating symphony of metal and misery. He'd spent the night on his cot, not sleeping, but strategizing. Rattler's veiled threats from yesterday echoed in his mind, along with the unsettling sight of the gear he'd moved. He knew he'd bought himself a moment of peace, but not respect. Not yet. Breakfast was a watery gruel, eaten in silence under the watchful eyes of guards and the simmering animosity of Rattler's crew. They sat opposite him, a phalanx of scowls and silent challenges. Elias met their gazes with an impassive stare, showing neither fear nor defiance. He understood the game. He wasn't new to the predator-prey dynamic. just a different kind of jungle. Later, in the yard, the air hung heavy with the smell of stale sweat and unfulfilled aggression. The concrete expanse, caged by chain-link fences topped with razor wire, was a stage for dominance. Inmates lifted makeshift weights, ran laps, or simply paced like caged animals. Elias moved to an empty section, beginning a series of stretches, his large frame bending with surprising fluidity. He felt the eyes on him, especially Rattler's. "Look at the new meat." Rattler's voice sliced through the drone of the yard, amplified by the sudden hush that fell over his crew. "Think he's gonna work off that extra baggage?" A ripple of snickers went through the group. Elias straightened, his breath even. He turned slowly, his eyes locking with Rattler's. "Always improving, Rattler. That's the goal, isn't it?" His voice was calm, devoid of inflection. Rattler sauntered closer, his cronies forming a semicircle behind him. "Some of us gotta work harder than others to earn our keep. You look like you've been doing a lot of sitting. And you look like you've been doing a lot of talking," Elias countered, a subtle edge entering his tone. The snickers died. Rattler's face tightened. "Funny guy. You think you're tough because you moved some boxes. That's for weaklings. Real men earn their respect." He gestured to a series of concrete blocks arranged in a rough obstacle course at the far end of the yard. "We got a little challenge here. See how tough you are then." A hulking man named Grizz, one of Rattler's enforcers, stepped forward, his knuckles dragging on the ground. "This ain't no pretty boy obstacle course. This is about grit, about power." Elias surveyed the course, a wall of stacked tires, a low crawl under barbed wire, a series of uneven concrete slabs to navigate, and finally, a heavy tractor tire to flip multiple times. It was designed to punish. "What's the prize?" Elias asked, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Rattler grinned, a wolfish baring of teeth. "The prize is you don't get to be a punchline anymore. You finish, you get respect. You don't, well, we find other ways to have fun." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. Elias nodded. "All right, let's see it." Grizz stepped up to the starting line, his chest puffed out. "I'll show you how it's done, big man. Just try to keep up." He exploded from the start, a surprisingly agile blur of muscle. He scaled the tire wall with practiced ease, slithered under the wire like a snake, and bounded across the slabs. The tractor tire, a formidable beast, yielded to his grunts and strained muscles, flipping over and over until he crossed the finish line, chest heaving. A smattering of applause broke out from Rattler's crew. Grizz turned, a smug grin plastered on his face. Beat that, old-timer." Elias stepped to the starting line, his breathing still steady. He looked at the course, then at Rattler, a silent challenge passing between them. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, a visual memory of similar, far more dangerous courses flashing through his mind. Then, his eyes snapped open, blazing with an unexpected intensity. He moved. He didn't possess Grizz's lean agility, but his sheer mass translated into an unstoppable force. He didn't scramble over the tire wall. He surged, leveraging his weight to propel himself upwards, with a powerful surge of his thick thighs, clearing it in 2 swift movements. The barbed wire became a mental puzzle, his body moving with an economy of motion honed by years of avoiding worse. He didn't bound over the concrete slabs. He flowed, his heavy boots finding purchase with an uncanny balance, his large frame absorbing the unevenness with a controlled grace. When he reached the tractor tire, a collective gasp went through the onlookers. It was enormous, easily twice his weight. Grizz had struggled. Elias took a deep breath, his muscles coiling under his worn jumpsuit. He bent, his fingers finding purchase, and with a grunt that seemed to come from his very core, he heaved. The tire lifted, then tumbled. He followed its momentum, flipping it again and again, each rotation a testament to a strength that went beyond mere bulk. Sweat slicked his brow, but his movements remained powerful, controlled. He crossed the finish line, his chest rising and falling rhythmically, his breath only slightly ragged. The yard was silent. Rattler's grin had vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Grizz stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. Elias walked over to Grizz, extending a hand. "Good run, Grizz." Grizz, still reeling, shook his hand slowly, his eyes wide. The air in the yard had changed. The taunts had died, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning respect. Elias had not just completed the challenge, he had dominated it. He had shown them that size was not a weakness, but a weapon. And in doing so, he had shifted the balance of power, just a little. Rattler's eyes, now devoid of amusement, narrowed. He knew he had underestimated his new inmate. This wasn't just a big man. This was something else entirely. Something formidable. "All right, Elias," Rattler said, his voice lower now, stripped of its earlier bravado. "You made your point." The respect was grudging, but it was there. And Elias knew this was just the beginning. A shove and a stare. The metallic shriek of the mess hall door sliced through the stale air. A familiar overture to the endless, drab routine. Elias merged with the sluggish current of bodies, a river of men flowing towards their meager rations. The heavy atmosphere reeked of boiled vegetables and a faint coppery tang. Today's offering was as indistinct as yesterday's. He claimed a tray, its cold, slick surface a familiar sensation, and joined the serpentine queue. A sudden, forceful push sent him reeling. The tray rattled precariously, and a splash of lukewarm broth stained his sleeve. He regained his footing, swiping the damp fabric with the back of his hand, and turned. Rattler stood there, a sneer contorting his thin lips. His eyes, usually agleam with cold amusement, now held a glint of something new, a simmering resentment. "Watch it, tub of lard," Rattler snarled, his voice a low growl, barely audible above the general din. "Some of us got places to be." Elias met his gaze, his own unwavering. A hush descended upon the mess hall, a ripple of anticipation spreading as men paused, forks suspended midair. The tension was a palpable current. Rattler, since the Grizz incident, had been uncharacteristically subdued, a viper momentarily defanged. This public taunt was a blatant attempt to reclaim lost prestige, to reassert his dominion. "My apologies," Elias replied, his voice level, revealing no hint of emotion. "Didn't realize you were lurking." A low murmur swept through the room. Rattler's jaw tightened. He closed the distance, encroaching on Elias's personal space. The stench of stale sweat and something acrid, cheap tobacco perhaps, assailed Elias's nostrils. "You think you're clever, don't you, fat boy?" Rattler hissed, his voice barely a whisper. Yet the intensity of his stare magnified it to a shout. "You think one fluke changes anything?" Elias simply stared back, his expression a mask. He saw the anger beneath Rattler's forced bravado, the humiliation of his enforcer's public defeat. He understood Rattler sought not an apology, but a reaction. Rattler's eyes, dark and predatory, narrowed further. He leaned in, his breath hot against Elias's ear. "You're about to learn, Lucky Break, that there are more ways to break a man than a foot race." His gaze flickered to the untouched food on Elias's tray. "Enjoy your slop. It might be your last for a while." He straightened, a grim satisfaction playing on his face. Then, with a final, lingering glare, Rattler sauntered away, his crew parting for him like a curtain. The low hum in the mess hall slowly resumed, though an undercurrent of unease persisted. Men stole glances at Elias, a blend of curiosity and apprehension in their eyes. They had witnessed the challenge, the silent declaration of war. Elias retrieved his tray, the lukewarm broth now entirely unappealing. He moved to an empty table in the corner, his back to the wall, and sat. He left the food untouched. Instead, he observed, his gaze sweeping the room, charting faces, noting alliances, discerning the subtle shifts in power. He registered the nervous glances thrown his way, the hushed conferences among Rattler's men. He felt the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken questions of what would come next. The victory over Grizz had been gratifying, a vital assertion of self in an environment designed to strip men of their identity. But it had also etched a target on his back, a brighter, more distinct one than before. Rattler wouldn't let this slight pass, not in this place. The shove in the mess hall wasn't merely physical. It was a psychological probe, a public pronouncement that the game was far from over. Elias ate his meal slowly, deliberately, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. He now understood the rules of this particular jungle. Respect wasn't freely given, it was earned, often brutally. And once earned, it demanded fierce defense. This prison wasn't just about survival. It was a ceaseless negotiation of power, a brutal dance where every move, every gesture, carried significant weight. He felt the cold steel of the spork in his hand, a small, insignificant utensil, yet capable of inflicting damage if wielded correctly. He finished his meal, the bland taste doing little to sate his hunger, but the confrontation had sharpened his senses. He understood now that the true battle had just begun. When the guards signaled the end of the meal, Elias rose, his movements unhurried. He deposited his tray, its clatter echoing the earlier shove, and exited the mess hall, not looking back, but acutely aware of every gaze, every unspoken question, every lingering threat. The prison was a chessboard, and Rattler had just made his next move. Elias knew it was his turn to counter. Cornered in the laundry, the clatter of industrial washers was a constant, grinding symphony in the prison laundry. Steam, thick and hot, coiled around the hulking machines, clinging to the grimy concrete walls and making the air heavy with the metallic tang of soap and damp fabric. Elias, stripped to a sweat-soaked undershirt, hauled a colossal sack of prison whites towards a vacant machine, his muscles bunching and releasing with practiced ease. The rhythmic thrum of the machinery usually offered a kind of anonymity, a brief respite from the ever-present eyes. Not today. He felt the shift in the air before he saw them. The laundry crew, typically a sullen, quiet bunch, had melted away, leaving only the relentless churning of the machines and the oppressive silence of expectation. Then, the figures emerged from the swirling steam, coalescing into the familiar, menacing shapes of Rattler's crew. Diesel, a walking slab of muscle with a perpetually scowling face, led the charge, flanked by two others Elias didn't recognize by name but knew by their predatory glares. Rattler himself wasn't present, a telltale sign that this wasn't a casual encounter. This was a message. "Well, well," Diesel rumbled, his voice scraping over the mechanical din. "Look what the cat dragged in. The new boss, huh?" He stopped a few feet from Elias, hands shoved into his pockets, a casual stance that belied the coiled tension in his frame. The two unknowns fanned out, subtly blocking the narrow exit to the sorting area. Elias straightened, letting the heavy sack thud to the floor. He met Diesel's stare, his own gaze unblinking. Something I can help you with, Diesel? His voice was calm, almost bored, a stark contrast to the thumping adrenaline in his veins. The air in the laundry room grew thicker, the heat intensifying not just from the steam, but from the unspoken challenge hanging between them. Diesel took a slow step forward, a smirk playing on his thick lips. Just wondering if you've forgotten your place, big man. That mess hall stunt, it didn't sit right with some folks. Folks who've been here a long time. He gestured vaguely, with his head towards the others. My place, Elias replied, his voice even, is wherever I earn it. He leaned against the washing machine, feigning nonchalance, but his eyes tracked the movements of the two men flanking Diesel. They were younger, less seasoned, but eager to prove themselves. Earn it? Diesel scoffed, taking another step. Around here, you take it. And you took something that wasn't yours. Rattler's not happy. And when Rattler's not happy, nobody's happy. He stopped directly in front of Elias, his bulk a wall. The smell of stale sweat and cheap cologne wafted from him. Elias pushed off the machine, moving with a deceptive fluidity for a man his size. He didn't back down, didn't flinch. Rattler can come tell me himself if he has a problem. Diesel's smirk vanished. He sent us to remind you who runs things, to put you back in your box. He lunged, a surprisingly swift move, aiming a heavy fist at Elias's jaw. Elias reacted instantly, his years of training kicking in. He swayed back, the punch whistling past his ear, and then countered, a short, sharp jab to Diesel's solar plexus. The air exploded from Diesel's lungs in a pained grunt. He stumbled backward, clutching his midsection, his face contorted in shock. The two younger men surged forward, emboldened by Diesel's momentary vulnerability. One swung a wild haymaker, while the other moved to flank Elias. Elias ducked under the first swing, his massive hand shooting out to grab the assailant's arm. With a powerful twist, he spun the man around, using his momentum to slam him into the industrial washer with a resounding clang. The younger inmate gasped, winded. The second attacker hesitated for a split second, seeing his partner incapacitated. That was all Elias needed. He moved like a freight train, closing the distance, his elbow connecting with the man's chin with a sickening crack. The inmate's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Diesel, still gasping for air, watched in stunned silence. His chest heaved, but the fight had drained from his eyes. Replaced by a dawning fear, he hadn't expected this. None of them had. They'd expected a brawl, a messy scuffle, not a dismantling. Elias turned slowly back to Diesel, his chest rising and falling evenly, not a bead of sweat betraying any exertion beyond the laundry's heat. His eyes, usually placid, held a cold, unwavering intensity. "Anyone else want to remind me of my place?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous, cutting through the whirring of the machines. Diesel shook his head, a slight tremor in his hands. He looked at his fallen men, then back at Elias, a flicker of something akin to respect, or perhaps just stark terror in his gaze. He backed away slowly, carefully, until he reached the door to the outside. He didn't run. He just left, retreating into the steaming labyrinth of the prison's inner workings, leaving Elias alone with the humming machines, the crumpled bodies, and the indisputable silence of his victory. The heat in the laundry room suddenly felt a little less oppressive. The unveiling of strength. The mess hall's usual din of clanking trays and low chatter provided the backdrop for Elias's midday meal. Yet today, an unsettling undercurrent snaked through the room. Diesel, his face a landscape of fresh contusions, slumped at Rattler's table, his customary swagger replaced by a brooding scowl. As Elias wove through the crowded benches, a hushed deference followed him, a novelty he hadn't quite registered. He picked distractedly at his rubbery chicken, acutely aware of the gazes that shadowed his every move. Later, the yard's tension felt like a physical weight. Rattler's usual boisterous entourage was muted, their customary taunts supplanted by wary glances. Elias found a quiet niche near the basketball court, observing a desultory game, the dull thud of the ball against concrete, a counterpoint to the nervous energy humming around him. Then, a sharp whistle pierced the air. "Hey, big man!" Rattler's voice, a familiar rasp laced with venom, carved through the relative quiet. Elias turned slowly, his expression a carefully guarded blank. Rattler sauntered closer, flanked by two new, hulking enforcers, their faces grim. "Seems you've been making quite an impression. Some of the fellas are curious." Elias merely arched an eyebrow, a silent invitation to continue. Rattler gestured towards a makeshift weight bench where several of his men strained against a heavily loaded bar. "You think you're strong, huh? Let's see what that bulk is really made of. 50 reps. That bar, then the next heaviest, then the next. Non-stop." He smirked, the challenge gleaming in his eyes. "Unless you're all show." A ripple of anticipation coursed through the yard. Inmate eyes, hardened by countless years of confinement, locked onto Elias. This was more than a physical test. It was a public declaration, a demand for capitulation. Elias walked towards the bench, his stride unhurried, his large frame radiating an unnerving calm. He peeled off his denim jacket, revealing the worn gray prison shirt, stretched taut across his formidable shoulders. He approached the bar, a thick steel pipe bristling with jagged concrete slabs. It looked impossibly ponderous, designed solely to deter. Elias gripped it, his hands, calloused from years of relentless discipline, settling into place. A profound hush fell over the yard. He inhaled deeply, the muscles in his arms coiling. The bar rose with astonishing ease, held steady for a fraction of a second, then began its rhythmic ascent and descent. 1, 2, 3. The initial reps drew skeptical murmurs, which quickly dissolved into an astonished silence. Elias moved with an almost hypnotic efficiency, his breathing controlled, his face a stoic mask. The concrete slabs seemed to defy gravity, blurring as they rose and fell. Diesel, observing from Rattler's side, shifted uneasily. The new enforcers, their bravado visibly deflating, exchanged uneasy glances. As Elias reached 30 reps, fine beads of sweat traced paths down his temples, yet his movements remained fluid. 40, 45. The crowd pressed in, a collective breath caught. When he finally racked the bar after 50 reps, the clang of metal reverberated like a gunshot. He paused for only a breath, then moved to the next, even heavier bar. The second set commenced and a new quality of tension gripped the yard. This wasn't merely brute power. It was an indomitable endurance, a defiance of the body's natural limits. Elias pushed through, each rep a testament to an unseen internal discipline. His muscles strained, a subtle tremor running through his arms, but his eyes remained singularly focused, resolute. The grunts of effort were minimal, almost absorbed by the sheer force of his will. When the second bar was finally racked, the yard remained stunned into silence. Elias, his chest rising and falling slightly, swiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He met Rattler's gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible challenge simmering within his own. Rattler's face was a mask of disbelief, his customary arrogance replaced by a fleeting flicker of genuine fear. He had expected Elias to falter, to break, to expose himself as a charlatan. Instead, he had witnessed a controlled, almost surgical display of raw, unyielding power. The gang leader's meticulously constructed dominance, built on intimidation and the illusion of unassailable might, had just been publicly, irrevocably chipped away. "He ain't human," one of Rattler's men mumbled, his voice a barely audible whisper. Elias ignored them. He walked back to his jacket, retrieved it, and shrugged it on. The quiet deference in the mess hall earlier now felt like a palpable reverence. The whispers were no longer speculative, but awestruck. He had unveiled a strength none of them had anticipated, a depth of power that transcended the purely physical. He had not merely met Rattler's challenge. He had shattered it, and in doing so, had subtly but irrevocably shifted the tectonic plates of the prison's power structure. The yard, once Rattler's undisputed domain, now felt like a landscape irrevocably altered, awaiting its new master to claim it, and dancing with danger. Usually, the mess hall pulsed with the clang of trays and a droning chorus of voices, a monotonous din that swallowed individual sorrows. Today, though, a hushed reverence had settled. Elias sat alone, a plate of congealed food before him, untouched. Every eye in the room, from grizzled long-timers to greenhorn recruits, impaled him. An unspoken query vibrated in the air. What now? Rattler, too, was present, his diminished retinue clinging to him like flotsam after the weightlifting fiasco. His usual throne, the table nearest the guard station, seemed to shrink, almost cowering. Elias felt Rattler's gaze, a smoldering ember of fury and disbelief. He didn't need to look up to know Rattler wrestled with the image of this formidable man, a stark contrast to his own shattered authority. A guard, Miller, a burly figure etched with perpetual weariness, drifted past Elias's table, subtly depositing a small folded note beside his plate. The maneuver was so practiced, so discreet that only Elias and perhaps a handful of the most observant noticed. Elias's fingers brushed the paper as he reached for his water, a deliberate, unhurried motion. He neither unfolded it nor glanced its way, simply pocketing it. He sensed the subtle shift in the room's energy, the prickle of renewed curiosity, a murmur of nascent speculation. Later, in the deafening solitude of his cell, Elias uncreased the note. The cramped, nearly illegible script declared, "Library, 1900, alone. The old man wants to talk." No signature, no embellishment. The message was spare, direct, hinting at a new kind of confrontation. The old man was a legend, a shadowy presence in the prison's folklore, a former power broker rumored to have relinquished his throne decades ago, yet whose influence, like a hidden root system, still permeated the institution's very foundations. Precisely at 7, Elias entered the library. The room was shrouded in gloom, towering shelves of forgotten books casting skeletal shadows. The air hung heavy with the scent of aged paper and fine dust. In the furthest corner, hunched over a well-worn copy of Homer, sat a man whose face was a topography of suffering and wisdom. He was slight, almost fragile, with wisps of white hair and eyes that seemed to contain epochs. This was the old man. "Elias." The old man's voice was a surprisingly resonant, gravelly whisper. "You've certainly made an impression." He closed the book, placing it gently on the table. Elias remained standing, his hands loosely clasped before him. "Just trying to get by." The old man chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Getting by, you say? You've dethroned a king without lifting a fist, simply by existing. That's far more than getting by." He gestured to the chair opposite him. Sit. We need to discuss the dance. Elias sat, the wooden chair groaning under his weight. What dance? The dance of power, boy. The one you've just joined, whether you intended to or not. Rattler is a wounded animal, dangerous and unpredictable. He will not concede easily. His pride is his lifeblood, and you've bled him dry. The old man leaned forward, his eyes piercing. He'll come for you, but not with brute force this time. He'll use poison, subterfuge. He'll try to turn the very air you breathe against you. I'm ready for it, Elias stated, his voice flat, devoid of bravado. Are you? The old man raised a thin eyebrow. This isn't about strength anymore. This is about strategy, about understanding the currents beneath the surface. Rattler controls the contraband, the small favors, the intelligence. He has eyes and ears in every corner. He'll try to isolate you, to make you an outcast, a pariah even among those who now respect your strength. Elias recalled the untouched plate in the mess hall, the sudden silence. He was already isolated, a monument of power without a constituency. What do you suggest? The old man smiled, a network of fine wrinkles deepening around his eyes. You need to show them you're more than just muscle. You need to show them you can deliver, that you can be trusted, that you can offer something Rattler never could. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. There's a new shipment coming in next week. A big one, from the outside. Rattler's been planning it for months. If you can disrupt it, that would be a true blow. A new challenge. Elias felt a familiar spark ignite within him, a low thrum of anticipation. This wasn't about raw power. It was a chess game, a test of intellect and cunning. How do I disrupt it? That, my boy, the old man said, leaning back, a glint in his ancient eyes, is where the dance truly begins. You have the strength. Now you must learn the steps. The clock above the doorway chimed 7 times, its metallic rings echoing in the quiet library. It was a signal, a reminder that their time was limited. Elias stood. A new weight settled on his shoulders, a different kind of burden than the iron he'd so easily lifted. The real fight, he realized, was only just beginning. The quiet aftermath. The mess hall's metallic clatter and hushed conversations felt off. Elias, ladling a grayish gruel onto his plate, sensed a subtle shift, a vibrating current of unspoken tension. Rattler occupied his usual table, his depleted crew around him. But the customary boisterousness had vanished, replaced by low whispers and snatched glances. The public humiliation hadn't merely stripped Rattler's dignity. It had gnawed at the gang's once impenetrable aura. Now they resembled cornered beasts, more than apex predators, their eyes flicking, assessing, calculating. Elias found a solitary corner, observing. He ate slowly, savoring the food's blandness. The mundane act, a stark counterpoint to the coiled anticipation tightening his gut. He knew Rattler wouldn't simply let it pass. The old man's words echoed. He'll try to outmaneuver you, not outfight you. Rattler understands power. He'll seek out weakness, not a straight rematch. Later that afternoon, during yard time, the usual din of yells and bouncing basketballs was subdued. A handful of Rattler's men, clustered by the weight pile, their backs to the wall, their gazes sweeping the expanse. One, a cadaverous man with a perpetual sneer, met Elias's eyes. There was no challenge, no overt aggression, just a cold, evaluating stare. It was the look of a hawk circling, awaiting its moment. Elias spent his hour pacing the perimeter, senses sharpened, his mind sifting through permutations. He felt the weight of unseen scrutiny, the pressure of a game that had only just begun. The old man had cautioned him about the contraband dance, a delicate choreography of deceit and leverage. Disrupting the shipment wasn't about brute force. It was about exposing the chinks in Rattler's network, turning his own system against him. Back in his cell, the stagnant air hung heavy with implied threats. Elias sat on his bunk, the coarse fabric scratching his palms. He pondered the cryptic message about the shipment, a phrase so innocuous, yet so pregnant with meaning in this confined world. The old man had offered no specifics, no details beyond the directive to ensure it doesn't arrive. He was being tested, not just by Rattler, but by the old man himself. This wasn't a simple instruction. It was an invitation to demonstrate initiative, to prove his mettle in a different kind of arena. A soft tap at his cell door startled him. It wasn't the guard's customary knock. Elias rose, his hand instinctively gripping the small concealed shiv he'd fashioned from a toothbrush handle. Through the narrow slot, he saw a younger inmate, his face ashen, eyes wide with apprehension. It was Mateo, a quiet kid who cleaned the cell block. "Elias," Mateo whispered, his voice barely audible. "Rattler. He sent me." Elias's grip tightened on the shiv. He remained silent, letting Mateo's fear fill the void. Mateo swallowed hard. "He wants you to know. He has connections. Outside. Connections who know about your family." A chill dread snaked through Elias. He'd anticipated a direct challenge, an ambush, but this was different. This was a direct threat to the few people left in his life who mattered. Rattler had breached the walls, crossing a line most inmates rarely dared. "What else did he say?" Elias asked, his voice a low thrum. Mateo flinched. He said it's a warning, to back off, to stay out of his business." Elias leaned closer to the slot, his eyes piercing. "Did he tell you what his business is?" Mateo shook his head, his lower lip trembling. "No, just stay away from the delivery on Tuesday." Tuesday, the contraband shipment. Rattler, in his attempt to intimidate, had inadvertently provided Elias with a crucial piece of intelligence. The old man had been right. Rattler was playing a different game, one of calculated moves and veiled threats. But in his arrogance, he had exposed a vulnerability. "Go," Elias said, his voice firm. "Tell Rattler I received the message." As Mateo scurried away, Elias felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't merely about prison politics anymore. This was personal. Rattler had underestimated him. Not just his physical strength, but his resolve. His unwavering determination to protect the little he had left. The quiet aftermath was over. The game had just escalated. Elias began to meticulously plan, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities, each thread leading back to Tuesday. The contraband wasn't just a shipment. It was a battleground. And Elias was ready to fight. A veteran's legacy. The clang of breakfast trays, usually a muffled backdrop, now hammered Elias's heightened senses. Tuesday, the word hummed a low, insistent note beneath the mess hall's cacophony. He watched Rattler, hunched over his grits, his usual swagger replaced by a coiled tension that diminished his crew. Rattler's gaze flickered like a cornered animal, never quite settling on Elias. It was the look of a predator nursing a wound, poised to strike. Elias recognized it. He'd seen it in the eyes of his quarry, and in his own reflection after particularly brutal missions. "You got that look about you," the old man observed, his voice a gravelly murmur, as he settled onto the bench beside Elias, nudging a plastic spoon toward untouched eggs, like a hound on a fresh scent. Something like that, Elias murmured, pushing the plate away. Hunger was a distant thought, adrenaline already buzzed in his veins. Any word on Mateo? The old man took a slow sip of lukewarm coffee. Mateo's been uncharacteristically quiet, too quiet for a man who rattles on as he does. He paused, eyes scanning the room, lingering on the guard station. Heard a whisper. High alert today. Double patrols. Extra eyes on the yard. Double patrols for what? Elias's voice dropped to a near whisper. The old man chuckled, a dry, wheezing sound. For a delivery, I'd reckon. Rattler's not the only one who likes his little enterprises to run smoothly. He leaned closer, the scent of stale tobacco and something faintly metallic clinging to him. There's a new guard on D Block. Young, fresh from the academy. Eager to make a name. And prone to oversights, if properly motivated. Elias mulled this over. A new guard, a vulnerability. It fit Rattler's modus operandi. An inside man, groomed or blackmailed, to facilitate the drop. The old man offered fragments, not the complete mosaic, but enough to sketch the contours of the scheme. Later, in the yard, Elias sought out Big Mike. The giant of a man was lifting weights, muscles rippling like shifting earth beneath his thin undershirt. Mike, Elias said, his voice low. Big Mike grunted, lowering the bar, sweat beading his forehead. Elias, what's up? I need you to keep an eye out today, especially on the delivery trucks. Big Mike wiped his brow with a towel. The food truck? Or the laundry? Any of them. Anything that looks out of place. Anything that might be carrying more than just supplies. Big Mike's eyes narrowed. He glanced at Rattler's crew, huddled by the basketball court, their whispers carrying on the stale air. You think today's the day? Elias simply nodded. Big Mike, despite his imposing physique, possessed a keen mind, understanding the unwritten grammar of the prison, the subtle currents of power, the ceaseless struggle for dominance. I'll keep my eyes peeled, Elias. Don't you worry. The afternoon crawled. Elias moved through his routine, but his thoughts were elsewhere, anticipating. He noted the increased guard presence, precisely as the old man had predicted. Officers' faces were drawn, their movements sharper. An unspoken tension crackled in the air, a premonition felt only by those attuned to the prison's underlying rhythm. During recreation, Elias saw it. A nondescript white panel van, typically used for laundry, backed slowly toward the loading dock on the far side of the yard. It was a familiar vehicle, yet today something felt amiss. The driver, a stocky man Elias didn't recognize, projected an exaggerated casualness, his eyes sweeping the yard with a practiced nonchalance that screamed anything but. Then he spotted the new D-Block guard, the one the old man had mentioned, standing near the dock, his back to the van, seemingly engrossed in conversation with another officer. But his posture was too rigid, his glances toward the van's rear too frequent. Elias's pulse quickened. This was it, the delivery. He caught Big Mike's eye across the yard. Mike gave an almost imperceptible nod, his gaze also fixed on the van. The subtle signal passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the unfolding drama. Elias began to walk, his pace unhurried, toward the edge of the recreation area, angling for a clearer view of the loading dock. He felt the weight of Rattler's gaze on his back, a silent challenge. Rattler was watching him, expecting him to interfere, perhaps even hoping he would. Rattler wanted a confrontation, but Elias wouldn't give him the fight he anticipated. He would dismantle Rattler's operation, piece by piece, starting with this delivery. The old man's words echoed. He's a man who deals in shadows. Bring light to his darkest corners, and he'll scurry. The van's rear doors were unlatched. The new guard, now alone, moved closer, his hand reaching for the latch. A small, almost invisible gesture, but enough. Elias quickened his pace. He wasn't just walking toward the dock. He was striding toward the heart of Rattler's meticulously constructed world, ready to tear it open. Earned respect. The hum of the laundry van's engine was a low growl in the pre-dawn quiet, a discordant note in the prison's usual symphony of distant shouts and clanging metal. Elias watched from the shadowed recess of the recreation yard, a ghost in the gray light. The new guard, whose name he now knew as Miller, fumbled with the D-block gate key, his movements stiff with a tension that wasn't just about the chill in the air. Rattler, across the yard, was a coiled spring, his eyes glued to the van's rear doors. Big Mike's voice, a low rumble, broke the silence beside Elias. "That's it, boss. Same van as yesterday. Only this time it's parked right up against the service entrance, doors facing away from the tower." Elias nodded, a grim satisfaction settling in his gut. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. Keep an eye on Miller. See if he gets distracted. Miller, true to form, was indeed distracted. As the laundry crew, two hulking figures in stained jumpsuits, began unloading industrial-sized bags, Miller's gaze drifted to the distant perimeter fence, then to his watch. Everywhere but the actual operation. A subtle nod from one of the laundrymen, almost imperceptible, was all the signal Rattler needed. He moved, a predator stalking its prey, melting into the shadows near the D-block service entrance. Elias held back, letting Rattler make his move. This wasn't about a quick bust. It was about exposing the rot. He saw Rattler vanish inside, then reappear moments later, a small dark package tucked discreetly into his jumpsuit pocket. The exchange was swift, practiced. Miller, meanwhile, was now engaged in a seemingly intense conversation with the other laundry worker, his back conveniently turned. "Now," Elias murmured, pushing away from the wall. Big Mike followed, his massive frame a silent, formidable shadow. They approached Rattler just as he was about to slip back into the main block. The gang leader froze, his eyes widening in a mixture of surprise and panic. "What the hell do you want, Elias?" "Just admiring your efficiency, Rattler," Elias said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "You certainly have a knack for deliveries." Rattler's hand instinctively went to his pocket, his knuckles whitening. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Elias took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "Funny, because it looks a lot like you just received a package, a very exclusive package." At that moment, the other laundry worker, sensing trouble, made a move towards them, a glint of metal in his hand. Big Mike, however, was faster. He stepped in front of Elias, his massive arm shooting out, catching the worker's wrist in an iron grip. A sharp crack echoed in the enclosed space as the small,